She wrote to Elvis every single year for 40 years. And then, one day, he wrote back. It was the summer of 1965. Elvis Presley had just exploded onto the music scene. With his slicked-back hair, raw voice, and wild stage moves, he was like nothing the world had ever seen. Every teenage girl had his poster on their wall. Every boy wanted to be him. In a quiet town in Kansas, a 12-year-old girl named Emily sat cross-legged on her bedroom floor, holding a pen and a small sheet of paper. She had just listened to Heartbreak Hotel on the radio, and it had stirred something deep in her, not just excitement, but connection. Like somehow Elvis understood something about the world she lived in. The loneliness, the longing, the dream of something more. So she wrote him a letter. It was short and sweet. She told him she liked his music, that her daddy didn't, and that she played his songs on the radio when no one was home. At the end, she wrote, "I hope you're doing okay. I think you're special." She addressed it to Elvis Presley, Memphis, Tennessee. No exact address. Just hope. She never expected a reply. But that wasn't the point. It just felt good to write it. And so she wrote another the next year. And the year after that, through her teenage heartbreaks, her parents' divorce, and even the quiet loss of her older brother to the war, she kept writing. One letter every year, always addressed to Elvis, always sent with no guarantee it would ever reach him. She never stopped, even when the world moved on, even when Elvis became a global superstar, even when he stopped touring and rarely left Graceland. To Emily, Elvis wasn't just a singer, he was someone she had grown up with, a friend she'd never met. And somewhere deep down, she always wondered, did he ever see them? Life kept moving. Emily finished school, got married, had children. She worked at a local library, baked cookies every Sunday, and watched old Elvis movies every Christmas. And still, every August 16th, without fail, she wrote another letter. That date wasn't random. It was the day Elvis died in 1977. That first August Jerluth was the hardest. She sat by the radio, hearing the news, tears falling down her cheeks. The man she had never met, but somehow felt so close to, was gone. But the letters didn't stop. They simply changed. She no longer wrote to a living legend. She wrote to the memory of a man who helped her through some of life's darkest days. Her letters turned into... She'd tell him about her daughter's graduation, her son's first heartbreak, her husband's sickness. She'd talk about her fears, her hopes, her quiet victories. Each letter was like lighting a candle in the dark, a way to keep something alive. Something pure, something that reminded her of who she used to be. And then the world changed again. In the late 90s, her granddaughter, curious about the stack of envelopes in an old trunk, asked, "Grandma, who are these for?" That's when Emily told her story for the first time. Her granddaughter, moved by the devotion, took one of the letters and posted a picture of it online with a caption, "My grandma wrote a letter to Elvis every year since 1956. No one expected what happened next. The post went viral. Thousands of people shared it. Some laughed. Others cried. Many said it reminded them of something lost in the world. Patience, loyalty, belief in something bigger. But one person in Memphis saw it, someone connected to Graceland. And for the first time in 40 years, one of Emily's letters found its way home. Over the years, Mary's life changed. She got older, moved houses a few times, had a few jobs, made friends, and even faced hard times, just like anyone else. But through everything, one thing never changed. She wrote that letter to Elvis every year. Without fail, every time January came around, his birthday month, she'd sit down with a cup of tea, pull out a fresh sheet of paper, and write to him like he was an old friend. She didn't expect him to reply. In fact, she never even included a return address most years. It wasn't about getting something back. It was about connection, a feeling that someone out there, even someone as big as Elvis, might hear her words. Mary's letters weren't dramatic. She'd tell Elvis about her life, how her garden was doing, what book she was reading, her cat's new habit of sleeping in the sink. She even joked once that her singing voice had improved. but still wouldn't pass for backup. Cheese TR? She wrote with a smiley face. Time marched on. Her hair turned gray. Some years she forgot to mail the letter until February. One year her hand was shaky from illness, so she had to type it. But still, the letter always got written. Always signed the same way, Prinette with love, always Mary, yo ECA yo. Wone fan. To her, the letter was like a thread that tied her to something bigger than herself. Elvis may have been gone, unreachable, lost in the whirlwind of fame, or perhaps in another world entirely. But writing gave her hope. It made her feel young again. It reminded her of the girl she used to be, the one who sat cross-legged on the floor, in front of the record player, eyes closed, swaying to the voice that seemed to speak just to her. What Mary didn't know was that something unexpected was about to happen, something that would shake the dust off all those old letters, and bring her decades of quiet hope into the light. Something unimaginable. It was a rainy Tuesday when the letter arrived. Elvis Presley Enterprises, now a large organization handling fan mail, licensing, and all things related to Elvis's legacy, still receives thousands of letters every year. Most are read quickly, scanned, and filed away. Some are answered with a form letter. Most are forgotten. But this one, Mary's latest, was different. It landed on the desk of a young archivist named Jenna. She was new, fresh out of college, and had a deep love for old stories. She'd grown up hearing her grandmother talk about seeing Elvis live in 1956, and she knew there was something magical about the way fans connected with him, even decades after his passing. When Jenna opened Mary's letter, something caught her eye right away. The handwriting was careful, almost delicate. The tone was warm, honest, and more importantly, it mentioned something Jenna had never seen before. Serdia. This is my 40th letter to Elvis. I've written every year since I was a teenager. 40 years? Jenna's curiosity kicked in. She asked the archive team to help her check older mail records. Most had been digitized for preservation, and to her surprise, there they were, scanned copies of older letters from a woman named Mary. Different years, different paper, same signature. Always signed with love, always heartfelt. She felt goosebumps. Jenna showed the letters to her supervisor. At first, he brushed it off. Sweet, he said, but we get stories like this all the time. But Jenna wouldn't let it go. This isn't just some story, she insisted. This is someone who never gave up writing to him for 40 years. That kind of dedication deserves to be heard. They agreed to do something special. A tribute, something to honor Mary's loyalty. A few phone calls were made. Someone tracked down Mary through public records, surprisingly easy once they had her full name from the recent envelope. An invitation was written, not from Elvis himself, of course, but from Graceland. They wanted Mary to come. She had no idea her quiet letters, never meant to be seen, were about to take center stage in a way she never imagined. By the time she turned 60, Margaret had all but accepted that she would never meet Elvis. The world had changed. Her hair had turned gray, and her hands showed signs of time, but her heart still held on to that yearly tradition. Every January 8th, like clockwork, she'd sit at her kitchen table, write her letter, fold it neatly, and send it off with no real hope of a reply. Just the comfort of routine and the memory of a love that once lit up her youth. Then, in the summer of 2013, something changed. Margaret received a letter in the mail. Not just any letter, but one with a gold-trimmed envelope and an official stamp from Graceland. She thought it must have been a fan club newsletter, or maybe a souvenir catalog, but when she opened it, her hands began to tremble. Inside was a personal note from Lisa Marie Presley. Lisa had come across Margaret's letters while working on an archival project. She was helping sort through fan correspondence stored away in the Graceland vaults. Most were decades old and yellowed with age. But something about Margaret's letters stood out. The handwriting, the yearly consistency, the tone, never demanding, never intrusive, always full of warmth and sincere admiration. Lisa was so moved, she decided to do something extraordinary. In her letter to Margaret, Lisa explained how touched she was by the unwavering dedication. She invited Margaret to Graceland as a guest of honor during the upcoming Elvis Week celebration. Travel would be arranged. Accommodation would be covered. All they asked was that Margaret come and share her story. At first, Margaret didn't believe it. She called the number on the card and nearly dropped the phone. When she heard a real voice on the other end confirm everything. Her hands shook as she hung up, and for a moment, she just sat at the kitchen table in stunned silence. Tears welled in her eyes, not because she was finally going to Graceland, but because someone had noticed. Someone had read those letters. Someone had cared. For 40 years, Margaret had written into what felt like the void. Now, at last, the void had written back. When Margaret stepped onto the grounds of Graceland that August, it felt like stepping into a dream she'd had 100 times before. Except this time, it was real. The white-columned mansion, the music drifting faintly from speakers, the smell of blooming flowers in the Memphis heat. Everything was exactly as she'd imagined, and yet so much more. She was welcomed like royalty. Volunteers greeted her by name. A private tour had been arranged. Margaret, who had spent her whole life imagining what it would be like to walk those halls, now found herself standing in the very rooms Elvis once did. The jungle room, the trophy room, the meditation garden. But what truly moved her was the private session arranged in the Dada Archives room, the very place where Lisa had found her letters. There, in a neat pile tied with a red ribbon, were the original letters she had written across 4 decades. Each one saved, each one filed, not a single one lost or discarded. Margaret was speechless. Then, something remarkable happened. Lisa Marie herself entered the room. She gave Margaret a warm hug and thanked her. Not just for the letters, but for keeping the memory of her father alive in such a pure and heartfelt way. They sat down and spoke for nearly an hour. Margaret shared the story of how Elvis's voice had gotten her through heartbreak, job loss, and even the lonely days after her husband passed away. Lisa listened intently, occasionally smiling, occasionally tearing up. Margaret didn't meet Elvis Presley, not in the flesh, but in that moment, she touched his legacy. She touched the lives of those who loved him, who knew him, who carried his memory forward. And when she visited Elvis's grave in the meditation garden later that day, she knelt down quietly, pulled out a handwritten note, and placed it beside the flowers. It was her final letter. This one read simply, "Burial, thank you for being there, even when you didn't know you were." 40 years, that's how long she waited. Every year, without fail, Mary wrote a letter to Elvis Presley. Sometimes it was just a simple happy birthday. Other times a longer note about her life, her marriage, the birth of her children, the passing of her husband. She never knew if the letters ever made it to him. But she kept writing, and then one crisp autumn afternoon, the unimaginable happened. Mary, now in her late 70s, was sitting quietly on her porch in rural Mississippi. She lived alone now, her children all grown and moved away. The mailbox rattled, and there it was, a thick envelope with elegant handwriting and a golden seal. Inside was an invitation, a private event, no press, no crowd, just a quiet gathering in Graceland. The note was short but deeply personal. It read, "Sidon, dear Mary, I've read every single one of your letters. You reminded me that even through the noise, the lights, and the madness, I was never alone. Thank you. I'd be honored to finally meet you." Elvis, tears welled in her eyes. A week later, escorted by a black car with tinted windows, Mary arrived at Graceland. The estate was quiet, peaceful. And then he stepped out, older, softer around the edges, but unmistakably Elvis. No jumpsuit, no spotlight. Just a man in a simple jacket, with kind eyes. "Mary," he said, his voice warm and familiar. She nodded, too emotional to speak. He smiled and opened his arms. "I've been waiting to meet you." The two sat for hours talking like old friends. Elvis listened as Mary told him about the life she lived, and how he had always been part of it, even if from afar. He told her how her letters grounded him when fame made the world feel unreal, how her simple words helped him remember who he was at his core. That day wasn't about celebrity or fandom. It was about two souls who found comfort in each other's words. Across decades, through paper, through hope. And when it was time to say goodbye, Elvis held her hand and said, "Ho? You gave me something no one else could." Faith. That moment wasn't captured by cameras. It never made the headlines. But for Mary, and maybe even for Elvis, it was the most real moment of all. Stories like these remind us that connection doesn't need grand stages or big audiences. Sometimes it lives quietly in the pages of a letter or in the comments we leave on a video like this. So here's your part in this story. If someone has ever impacted your life, even from a distance, let them know. Write to them. Reach out. You never know how deeply your words might matter. And if this story moved you like it did us, hit that like button, subscribe for more untold stories, and share this with someone who still believes in the power of human connection.